Hi, my name is Thais Gibson, and I'm the creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video. And in this video, I want to talk to you about the love languages of the fearful, avoidant, and anxious, preoccupied attachment styles, and specifically how these love languages can interact and be quite similar, but also how, it's not just the love language, it's the strategies we use to meet the love language specifically that will impact the way we receive it more than anything else. And I'm going to give you an example. So let's say you have a fearful avoidant, and let's say they have a love language that's related to quality time. And also anxious preoccupied tend to have a high love language for quality time. Both of them tend to have this in the top 1, 2, or at max 3 of their highest love languages. Oftentimes what we'll see is for a fearful avoidant, that quality time is like deep conversation, presence, asking deep questions, sometimes even trying new things together, like a novelty exploration component. And the fearful avoidant tends to be in there. A lot of times for the anxious preoccupied, the love language is just spending ample time together. It can be talking on the phone. It can be going for a walk. It can be spending time with the anxious preoccupied's friends and family and you being there, doing things in groups together. And there's more of just interaction that doesn't have to be as deep, as present, as intense as it may be for a fearful avoidant. And so what's really important to notice here is that the love languages aren't the only thing that plays an impact. It's also the strategies and the ways that we receive the love languages in more specific of a manner that has a huge impact on the relationship, because you can guarantee that if a fearful avoidant is always just spending time with the anxious preoccupied friends and family, and there's not much one-on-one time, and there's not much deep conversation or stimulating conversation that's emotional or intellectual or these sorts of things, sometimes a fearful avoidant is going to feel like their quality time needs are not met, or their quality time love language, is not met. So you'll see these different dynamics at play. So we're going to cover this for the anxious preoccupied and the fearful avoidant. If you want to, as I go into these, do a deeper dive into this stuff, the anxious preoccupied and fearful avoidant relationship, we have very in-depth webinar style courses that are 4 or so hours long, all about all of the things between these two in a relationship, the reprogramming patterns, what each party needs to do to heal in the relationship well with each other, each one's needs, each one's fears, pain points, how to communicate to each other, the love languages, all these different things. So you can check that out for free for 7 days by clicking the link in the description box below and entering into our webinar library, and you'll see them in there when you search in the search bar, anxious, preoccupied, and fearful avoidant. Now, I talked about the first love language, which is quality time. This tends to be high for both the AP and the FA. Now, the next one is physical touch that tends to be quite high. For fearful avoidance, this can definitely be physical affection and cuddling and things like this. But for fearful avoidance, it can also be things related to sex and sexual chemistry and intimacy. Whereas for anxious preoccupieds, that can absolutely be there too. But a lot of times it's more like cuddling, physical affection, hand holding. Even another discrepancy you may see is sometimes fearful avoidants aren't the most public display of affection people, the most PDA people. They'll sort of not be as affectionate in public sometimes. Sometimes later into the relationship, this changes, or when they become more comfortable in themselves and become more secure, that can change. But anxious preoccupied individuals tend to be very comfortable with PDA and very sort of just assuming that well, if we're comfortable behind closed doors, why would we not be comfortable to hold hands and be physically affectionate in public? And so you'll see these other discrepancies here where the AP can take it really personally if the FA is physical behind closed doors and very affectionate and touchy-feely, but then not that way in front of other people. And so you'll see these sort of dynamics that can take place. Another big love language that tends to be quite powerful is words of affirmation. But if you pay close attention to this as well, words of affirmation as a love language. And by the way, these are Dr. Gary Chapman's 5 love languages. I don't know if I sometimes talk about these on the channel and reference him and reference all this stuff. So if you're not familiar, the big love languages are quality time, physical touch, words of affirmation, gifts, and acts of service, which is kind of like doing favors, doing physical acts of service, like cooking you breakfast, bringing you coffee, driving you to the airport. So you'll see in these different love languages that we have that different attachment styles can receive these things in a different form. And when it comes to words of affirmation, anxious, preoccupied individuals want to hear the words of affirmation that make them feel special, wanted, significant in some way, complimented, important, prioritized, needed. And fearful avoidants tend to want things that are deep and sincere, things that you notice that make them feel seen. So noticing things about their character, noticing things about their personality, like little traits or characteristics, and those things being complimented. They tend to do better with like the more specific things. And sometimes when they get an excess of compliments about not superficial, because everybody just has a preferred love language, and I'm not here to judge one thing as superficial or not, but like the lighter compliments, like the things that are not as deep and personal, the more like surface, not necessarily in a negative way, but you'll see some of those things. If the fearful one gets those too often, they'll tend to distrust it. They'll be like, oh, you say these things to everybody. Whereas anxious preoccupied, they really like that fills their bucket of need for words of affirmation. So again, you'll see these differences here that are important to pay attention to in a relationship. Acts of service, both tend to have like a decent acts of service one. APs tend to have a fairly higher need for gifts and thoughtfulness and care put into gifts and fearful avoidance. But for both of those styles, they tend to be lower on the totem pole. But acts of service, I mean, they tend to line up quite clearly there. And gifts, like where like neither of them have a big preference. Like it tends to be like, oh, just doing an act of service shows affection, shows care. And then gifts, we'll see fearful avoidance sometimes like lean away from gifts and feel even uncomfortable receiving gifts at times. Whereas anxious preoccupied will really want to put the thoughtfulness into gifts. And they tend to be quite big gift givers, not all the time, but a lot of the time in general. And that's sort of like showing the signs of their affection for somebody else. So I wanted to talk about this here today because we've talked about how love languages at a high level, but not gotten really specific about these things. The more specific we are, the more material we have to work with in relationships as a whole. So it's really important to pay attention to. So anyways, if you want to do a deeper dive into this stuff and tons of other things between the anxious, preoccupied, and fearful avoidant relationship, I've got really in-depth information for you that you can take, a week or so to go through and get all the sort of nuances in the relationship and things to be aware of so that the relationship can thrive and stay really connected and strong. So you can click the link in the description box below if you want to check that out. Thank you so much for being here and for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video.